asked me to start.
We'll let you in. We moved from hey, John. Okay,
There we go.
there you are. Nice to see your face.
You too. We're well attended today.
It's a popular meeting.
It looks like we are at 2:00. Can you all hear me?
Yes.
Yes. Okay, good. Welcome to this beautiful sunny day. Today is May 10th, 2023. It's 2:00 and we are meeting through Zoom. I'm calling for this work session to order. The agenda items today are the City Hall financing options and also the water rate study. I want to thank all citizens who are giving up this beautiful day to join us. Because this is a work session, there will be no public comment, nor will there be a vote on any of the issues before us. Nancy, could you please take roll call?
Yes.
Oh, okay.
Sorry. Jerry.
Here.
Jenna.
Here.
Brad.
Yep.
Deb.
Yes.
Linda.
Yes.
Thanks very much, Nancy. And it looks like we turn over the first session to Layla. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Mayor. So welcome, everyone. Got some good topics today. I'd like to welcome Becky Baxter from Business Oregon. She is the Special Public Works Fund Program Coordinator, and she'll be giving us an overview of the program itself and answer any questions that council might have. So we'd like to ask Becky to start us off, and then we'll move to John Peterson. He's a vice president with Piper Sandler, and he's the city's financial advisor. So whatever option the city ends up going with, whether it's special public works, or full faith and credit, or a GO bond, John will get us to the finish line. So pleased to have John here today. And once Becky's had a chance to do her presentation, I'm going to hand the reins over to John to walk us through some options. The real goal and outcome today is to provide council an opportunity to talk with these subject matter experts about the various financial options before them. Get questions or advice, and ideally provide staff with some direction on next steps. So with that, Becky, I'll hand the reins over to you, and thank you both so much for taking the time to be here today.
Yes.
Sure. Can everyone hear me okay?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, great. I hope there's somebody doing some yard work outside, so hopefully it's not disturbing. So if it is, I'll go close windows and stuff. So I am Becky Baxter. I am a program and policy coordinator at Business Oregon, which is the state's community and economic development agency. I manage the Special Public Works Fund, and I've been with the agency doing some other federal programs and other things since 2011. So I'm familiar with more than just the Special Public Works Fund, but that's the one I'll be speaking about today. So the city had inquired about the possibility of using the Special Public Works Fund for what we would term essential community facilities, which is City Hall, city fire or city police, city offices, emergency shelter, those types of things. And those are considered eligible under Special Public Works Fund. And just to back up, just so you know, the SPWF, I'll refer to it as that, the SPWF fund is backed by lottery-backed dollars. So it is state funding. So for those of you familiar with federal funding, where there's tons of, we call them cross-cutters, lots of program requirements, environmental, lots of other things that have to be done. Because the SPWF program is a state fund, it does not have some of those. Projects funded with SPWF normally will have prevailing wage, BOLI, as part of the requirement, and that's really just about the only requirement, and then you have to follow the state procurement rules as well. So that said, the project, as we have learned about it, is completely eligible for the Special Public Works Fund program. The caveat, I guess, with SPWF is it must be municipally owned. So in this case, all of the things that I saw is going to be city-owned things, city police, city hall, and interestingly enough, we've had a lot more communities that have been looking to SPWF to fund kind of a campus style city, kind of a city campus. So there, everything is kind of in one place. We've had several that have been doing this now, and I think it's a great idea. We had another community on the coast that moved their city hall and police out of the tsunami inundation zone, and that was one that we funded. So this is something that we are definitely doing and seeing more often. So I don't know what kind of questions you might have. Basically, for the amount, remind me again, it's like 5 million. Is that right? Am I correct with that?
Well, hopefully not, but we are looking somewhere between 3.5 to 4.5 million likely.
Okay, great. So just really, well, I'll stop there and see if there's any questions about the project itself, and then I can kind of walk through what our process is and how things work on the funding side of things.
I'll just ask a clarifying question. What does the building need to be out of the tsunami zone to qualify for this funding?
No, nope, that is not a program requirement. Yeah, it's just an example of one that did want to be out of the tsunami inundation zone. So they chose to move to higher ground. Yeah.
I had a question, Becky. It talks a lot about grants and loans. Are you going to explain the difference between those to us and what applies and what doesn't?
Yeah, I certainly can speak to that. In this particular situation, the project would be all loan. Grants, the intent of the legislature when they put this program together back in the 80s was that it would be mostly a lower interest loan to municipalities for infrastructure or essential community facility projects. The grants we have are very few and far between. They're mostly for like, during the wildfire, there were communities that had devastation to the point that FEMA had money that they put into those communities. Those types of federally declared disasters where there's a state match, then we have some grant dollars from SPWF to provide that state match. So that's one example of a grant component. But the projects like this would be all loan. And the interest rate is determined at the time of the application, which right now it might go down, but it's right now it's at 3.96.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Any other questions? And if you think of some, just raise your hand or tell me to stop, and I'll certainly answer your question.
Hey Becky,
So, yeah.
I have a question. Is there a requirement in how much of the projects you can finance via this?
We have a maximum of $10 million that's established by our administrative rule. So it is. We have from time to time waived that administrative rule, but that's what we normally stay with is a maximum of $10 million.
Okay, I guess what I was getting at, is there some requirement as far as how much money the city must pony up to be part of the project?
Oh, there's no match.
No
Nope,
match.
there's no match. Nope, no match requirement.
Okay.
No.
You just have to pay it back.
Yes,
Yeah.
that is a caveat. Yes, that there is that one. I cannot. I can't just wave a magic wand and go, nah, they're good. They're nice people. I don't have that. Nobody's given me that authority, and I don't expect I'll get it either. Yeah, there is a maximum of up to $10 million. We really want to, let's just say, because we've had some very large projects come in, if the project cost is above that $10 million, we just want to see other confirmed sources of funds so that we get a complete project. You want a complete project, so do we. We don't want half a city hall, that type of thing. So we just want to see that all the funds that would be needed to complete the project as proposed is committed to the project. So that would be something like, that not in this situation, because it doesn't sound like you're going to even come close to the $10 million request. Our process, just briefly, is you guys have already gone to the point that should you choose to, you could submit an application if the city chooses to move toward an SPWF loan. When that application comes in, it's reviewed by our public finance officers, so they underwrite the loan. we look to get a 1.20 debt coverage ratio, which just basically means there's plenty of money from the identified source of repayment to have money to pay the loan and still have enough extra so that the city doesn't just get to zero every time they make a payment. So there's a 1.20 debt coverage ratio. For a loan of this size, anything that's $3 million or greater in a loan goes through our Infrastructure Finance Authority board. That's just one of our threshold requirements for them to review and approve. I have never seen a loan not be approved. It's basically to help them see what kind of projects we're doing with the various programs within the agency. The board meets every other month. And so, for example, the next board meeting is going to be the first Friday of June, and then be the first Friday of August, et cetera. So just to kind of give you an idea of the timing. It's a pretty painless process. We do a lot by remote. If one would want to come to the meeting in person, we've started to do those again too. And we just ask city representatives, and if there's engineers or others, to come talk about their project, kind of just give us an overview of what the project will be. And then they ask questions sometimes of the public finance officers about the underwriting process and that sort of thing. Once the loan is approved, then you'll receive a contract, of course, and start on your project. So once you get to contract, funds are dispersed on a reimbursement basis. So in other words, you provide us with invoices and those are reimbursed back to the city to pay accordingly. Costs or interest begins to accrue with the first disbursement, but there's interest only that accrues. There's no repayment at this phase. You're welcome to pay the interest if you want as you go along, but it's not a requirement. Once the project is completed, usually 2 or 3 years, at that point is when it moves into a permanent loan. And then there's regular repayments, usually either once or twice a year. And interest that accrued during construction can either be paid at that time or it can be rolled into your loan. So there's some flexibility there. Like I said, go ahead. Did somebody have a question?
Becky, I have a question. In order to get before the board at the August meeting, when would a application have to be initiated?
We should have the application received by, let me just think backwards. Just to be on the safe side, we should have it by mid-June. So about a month from now would be best case scenario. We can do it faster, but there's several steps to go through as we go through management approval. So mid-June would be good.
Becky, you talked about retroactive going back as long as the invoices and things were there. Is that, did I read on page 4 that goes back 12 months?
Oh, are you looking at the pre-award costs?
Mm-hmm. Pre-awarded expenses.
So pre-award costs are a little bit, so I'll talk about the pre-award costs. Pre-award costs are non-construction related activities that can go back 12 months. So let's say you've decided to do some planning already or some design work. We have a lot of projects that have started to do some of their design work, and then they come in because it gives them a better idea of how much it's going to cost to do that project. So for those types of activities, non-construction, we can have a line item for up to 12 months for non-construction related activities. And we try not to do any more than 20% of the total project cost, which normally your engineering and design work is 12 to 15% of the project. And that would be something that you would put in the application as you're developing it to let us know, here's what we've done, and what we would want to be reimbursed for that we've accrued on.
Okay. The architectural work is applicable there. Mm-hmm. And surveying and soil testing and those kinds of things all are applicable. Okay.
Yes.
Thank you.
Everything, but just don't get that big excavator over there and start digging big pieces of dirt. That does not work.
Thank you.
Yes. And the reimbursement basis, I'd like to just touch on that a little bit more because these projects are, we know, very, very expensive. So there's a couple of different ways this can work. Let's say your architect turns in an invoice for, I'm just picking a number, for $5,000. And you're like, ooh, we can't cover that right now. And the architect has a, 30 or 45 days that, you can pay him back or pay him, excuse me. Whoever at the city would be the project manager would work with our project manager at our agency to send in what we call a disbursement request. It would be attached with that architect's invoice for $5,000. And then those are our top priorities for our project managers. They turn those around as fast as possible. And usually within probably 10 to 14 days, payments can get back to the city for you then to pay the architect or whatever that invoice might be.
Yeah.
So doesn't necessarily mean that the city has to fork out money to that architect and then reimburse itself. That is also an option, but because we know how these work, we know that sometimes that's not always possible to pay that contractor $100,000. So just know that when we say cost reimbursement basis, it basically means we just need invoices and then we'll disperse based on those invoices to make sure it's within the project scope and eligibility as approved.
Okay.
Like, no Hawaii vacations. You don't get reimbursed for that. No.
So just a quick question, bring me to Layla. So we've done most of our pre-construction work already. Is there anything that we have on the plate that may fall under?
Well, we've done up to 30% design and a fair amount of due diligence. So I think the last time I presented the project costs, the total project was 5.7, but we only need 5.2 to complete the project. So if council does elect to take out, so you'd be taking out more debt than we actually need to finish the project to pay us back for stuff we've already paid for. So that's not something I necessarily recommend. But if it is something that council wants to do, we can do that. We would need to, I think, pass a resolution to highlight those costs. But it is an option for you. It just would increase the project costs beyond what we need to finish the project because we've already spent that money. So we'd be borrowing money to pay ourselves back for
that was really my question. I thought we'd already expended that. I'm not suggesting.
We have.
That was my question. Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Becky, I had another question on page 5 under the loan information, the rates and the terms. Under C, it talks about collateral.
Yeah. So, go ahead.
What collateral do we?
I guarantee you the city or the state does not want to own any land. So we would not be taking like a lien or a trust deed on where your property is going to be. When we talk about collateral, we're looking at what is your repayment source. And I understand that you're going to be paying this with your
General fund.
Okay, but part of the source of that is going to be your
transient lodging.
Thank you. I was doing. I was just doing. I was just having a conversation with somebody about tax increment financing. So TIF was all that came to my head.
TLT.
Yeah, all of it. Yeah, exactly. So that's what we're talking about with collateral is like, sometimes when we're doing water or wastewater projects, you have user rates that make that, come in and that's how those payments get made. In this situation, it'd be your general fund. And then we would also, we look at it as 2 repayment sources just for additional security. So it would be the general fund and a full faith and credit pledge of the city. That's what we would look for as we do the underwriting. And then we look at that general fund balance, make sure that there's adequate money in there to make our payment as well as keep the city going.
I could just add that our collateral requirement on a bond would be basically the same. It'd be a full faith and credit pledge with the intent to repay, pledged from the general fund, but understood that a lot of the monies would be coming from transient lodging tax. So we'd be using that to calculate coverage.
I was curious on page 8 where it talks about the project applicants are strongly encouraged to hold at least one public hearing on each proposal or funding request. Layla, have our town halls met that request, or would this be in addition?
I can clarify that with Becky, but we've had a number of meetings about this. And I think when you all, if you decide what you want to do and you're taking public comment at that meeting, Becky, would that suffice?
Absolutely. We just want to make sure that your community knows what's going on. It's just, and it sounds like from the little history that I've heard about is that this has been a conversation very much at the city level. The residents have been in lots of conversations. So I'm sure you have met that. It would just be something that you put into your application of what have you done to let your community know what's going on.
Okay.
Yeah. Any other project questions or eligibility questions or concerns? Because I have one more little piece I want to add, but I wanted to make sure this part's all taken care of first.
I guess I have a timeline question for Layla. Looking at a mid-June application, are you able to get that in?
Yeah, so as Becky mentioned, we've already gone through the first step of the process with Business Oregon. So we're approved to apply, and I actually have the application materials in hand.
Awesome.
So I'll plan to fill them out. And we have, because we're so far along in the process, we actually have a ton of the information already. It's just a matter of putting it into the document. It's not an incredibly complex application form. And both Becky and Melanie at Business Oregon have been extremely helpful. And so I don't anticipate there being any concerns about meeting that deadline.
Yeah. And unlike when you have like a competitive application, SPWF is not a competitive program like you have in some federal programs. So if there's, like a question that the public finance officer has, we just do this back and forth until there's questions answered. And that can be along the way. Sometimes there's even questions that our IFA board members will come up with. So even though they give an approval, should you choose to go this route, there might be some follow-up questions and things like that. But it's a pretty, it's a give and take process. It's not, oops, you missed it, so you're out kind of thing. So.
And the budget that we've been going over the last couple of days, that approval date is in late mid-June. Is that right, Layla?
It is, but that's separate from this because we'll have to do a supplemental budget because we'd submit the application, but we wouldn't necessarily be approved for it.
Okay.
Time for the budget adoption. So I'm just anticipating and expecting that no matter what route council decides to take, if you proceed, we'll need to do a supplemental budget.
Okay, got it. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Great questions, you guys. Really good questions.
I was curious too on page 11, and it's under the development project application review criteria. It talks about the most cost-effective solution. How is that determined? That.
Yeah, that would be more applicable on like our water or wastewater projects where you have this water master plan that says you have these things wrong and you have 5 options to fix them. And that's where the city council would be looking at those options and say, well, if we do option 3, our user rates are going to have to go up $100 a month. That's probably not the best option that we want to use. So that's really more applicable for the water wastewater systems where there's multiple options of ways to fix something. In this situation, based on what you're doing as far as an essential community facility, with the exception of maybe, well, we probably shouldn't get the gold-plated faucets. We'll just get the regular ones. It'd be like that value engineering kind of stuff. but that's a choice for the city to make.
Okay.
We don't get into that business.
And then Becky, on page 12, it talks about the project site is zoned industrial.
That's for a different type of project.
Okay, got it.
So
Thank
you can just cross that out.
Okay, got it.
Yeah.
Okay.
Any other questions before I kind of?
I think that covers me.
Okay. You're welcome. You're welcome. Again, great questions. Really good questions. So with one of the opportunities that our agency has is, especially for what we would call this as a little bit of a larger project, we have the opportunity to work with the Oregon Bond Bank. And knowing that John is on the call, he can probably correct me somewhat if I misspeak, but I think I've got this pretty well down now. But we have the opportunity to use the Oregon Bond Bank. And that provides us with the ability to take loans that are good quality loans that are anywhere from $1 million on up to the $10 million. And we package them together and then we sell them to the Oregon Bond Bank. And so that provides us with another way to recapitalize the Special Public Works Fund and not just have to solely rely on more lottery-backed dollars coming through legislative appropriations. So this project would likely be considered with a Oregon Bond Bank deal. That determination won't be made for a long time. I'm just giving you information at this point in time of how that works for projects that we believe could go to the bond bank. What that means is during your construction phase, your interest rate is going to be super low. I don't know how low, but probably I'm going to guess between 1 and 1.5%. So that's almost free. So during your construction phase, any money that you disperse, that you draw on for your construction would be charged interest at that lower rate. And again, don't quote me on the 1.5% or anything, but it's a considerably lower than what our current IFA interest rate is, which is 3.96. So let's say for 3 years as you're building this out, that's what your interest is going to accrue at. At the point that the project is completed, that it's all done and you've moved in, and we're deciding to go to an Oregon Bond Bank sale, the finance officer that manages that will call the city and have the conversation with the city. So it's not like we just make this decision blindly. There is discussions with the community. At the time, if this loan goes into the bond bank, then at that time, you would get a rate determined at that time. That would be the rate that would be set then for the remainder life of the loan. And with those types of loans that go to the bond bank, there's the way we do ours, there's a 10-year call, which means for the first 10 years, you could not prepay. You could not pay it off.
Oh, yeah.
At that 10th year, you could choose, like, man, you guys were busy with a lot of visitors and you've got, $3.5 million sitting in your transient lodging and you just want to pay it off. You could do that at that 10-year call. Okay. Any questions about that before I give you one other little scenario?
So how would we know what interest to anticipate after that construction phase?
We have no idea. That's the crystal ball question. So that would be, let's say that was the conversation. We're 3 years down the road. And when we talk about the rate that's going to be at the bond market, it's going to be 4.5%, and interest, or the IFA rate, our interest rate is 3.96. You could say, yeah, you know what we want to go into a permanent loan at 3.96. We don't want to be considered for the bond bank. We can have that conversation. That's, you're not pushed into bond bank hell. That's a discussion that can be had at that time. And on the IFA loans, if it remains in-house, like if we just use in-house cash for the loan, the rate would be set at the time the application is received. And then that rate is for the life of the loan. And for a project like this, we could go out to 30 years. We could amortize out to 30 years. And then you could prepay at any time with our
in-house. We
loan.
could prepay anytime.
At any time. Only a bond bank loan is the ones that have the 10-year call. And it would still be a 30-year term. The term wouldn't reduce.
Becky, how do the bond bank interest rates compare to the IFA interest rates typically?
Trying to remember when our last bond sale was. I'm not usually playing in that. They don't let me play in that arena, but I think it was pretty close. There wasn't a lot of difference. So, and we have, the last I checked, I think we have a double A. That I better not, I'm not sure, but we have a good bond rating right now. So that means we usually can get a little bit better rate.
So if I'm understanding you correct, you're saying that you do assign us a interest rate when we submit the application, and we have the choice down the road of going to the bond bank or sticking with our original interest rate.
Yep. And just so that you know, though, we would probably initially put this like it was going to be going to bond bank, which gives you a huge advantage because then you're going to have a really low interest rate on the amount that has been dispersed as you're building. So it still is an advantage up front because you are going to have a much reduced interest rate during the construction phase.
I'm just curious, who makes the decision between a 15-year loan and a 30-year loan?
It's all based on the useful life of the project. So there's some things that we do, like if there's often, if it was only going to be, for example, a pump house that needed to be replaced on a system, the useful life of that is maybe 15 years. So then it's going to be a 15-year term.
Okay.
For something that has a useful life of 30 years, we can go out for 30 years. And almost all of our projects are 30-year projects.
Okay.
Yeah. Even if there's components within that project that might only have a 10-year useful life, as a whole, barring some unforeseen situation, a building being built is going to last for at least 30 years. Hopefully.
It's out of the tsunami zone, so that's a good thing.
Perfect. Yeah, that's great. Yeah. And I know that this property does have some contaminants, if I remember correctly, that there is some cleanup that has to be done. And I think you've been working with somebody at the agency that has those types of programs. Just so you know, SPWF can also be used for that. So my program wouldn't give you any of a clean bill of health or anything like that. It would just be that you can use SPWF for that work. So that is an option, but I would certainly talk to Karen at our agency on her brownfields programs first, because she probably or possibly maybe has a little bit of grant money that she could provide the city.
Yeah.
Yep, I just got the application today. So.
Okay, great. Yeah. So, I mean, again, we could do the work with SPWF, but Karen might have some other things that are a better deal for the city.
All right. Well, any other questions for Becky? And I'm sure, Becky, if council has follow-up questions, they can shoot them to me and we can route those over to you.
And just include Melanie as your regional development officer.
Absolutely.
Just keep her in the loop just so that, but yes, absolutely. I can answer questions as they come up for sure. Yeah.
Awesome. Great.
Yeah.
Sounds pretty exciting.
Yeah, I'm partial, but it's really a great program. There's not a lot of requirements beyond what I said, you don't have the federal requirements, which can be very time consuming and add a lot of cost to the project. Like we don't have American Iron and Steel. We don't have, some of those other federal things that have really added dollars to projects lately. So yeah, I think it's a good program. I'm excited to hear what you guys decide to do.
Thank you so much, Becky, for your time and information, and
Very much.
certainly
Well
Yeah.
in
done.
touch.
Absolutely. All right. I'm going to hop off to let you guys continue with your work session, but nice to meet you all and have a good
Nice to
rest of
meet
your
you.
day.
Thank
Yes.
you.
Okay. Thanks.
Thank you,
Bye-bye.
Becky.
Thanks very much, Becky.
You're welcome. Bye-bye. Thank you.
Okay, great. Well, that was a really useful session. And yeah, if anything comes up, let us know. And John's actually pretty knowledgeable about the Special Public Works Fund too. So I guess with that, John, I'm going to hand it over to you.
Thank you, Layla and Mayor Simmons, members of the council, and looks like we got a fair number of citizens and other folks on today. So glad to be able to meet with you. I think I've come before this group a couple of times before, and just mostly wanted to provide an update. I'm not sure, Layla, did you provide them the most recent thing that I sent over that had the two 15-year scenarios?
I did, John. Yeah.
Okay. There's a lot of detail in there that's not particularly needful. We always, when we're presenting for a project that is, somewhere we're not sure how far in the future, we always added an interest rate cushion, and we added a cushion of about 1.5% to the 15-year rate, and just for our purposes, it winds up in a very similar place in terms of interest rate cost to what the IFA and Becky Baxter is offering. And that hasn't always been the case. If you can find the first page inside the cover of the document that I sent, and I don't know, maybe I can even share this, would just make it easier possibly. Oh no,
Yeah.
screen sharing is just it's just a long graph showing interest rates on 20-year Treasury debt versus AAA MMD running from 1996 through the present 2023. And one thing worth noting is we have an inset of a 1-year history, and you can see that from a year ago rates kind of went mostly up for about 6 months, and peaking in October. And then since then they've vacillated some, but have come down, a fair amount to where the 20-year rate was just touching 4% in October, and is now in the I guess 320s. There we go. So that's the inset. There you can see rates going up and then coming back down. And the longer period, you can see that starting with the financial crisis in 2009, rates entered a period where they were significantly lower. There were obviously some spikes up at different times, but significantly lower than they had been in the previous 15 years. And so I would say at least the last 10 years, typically with just a special public works fund loan, we could usually get a better rate in the open bond market than what you would get there. That right now is not the case. I think the rates more or less match. And we would have the same restriction that if you were to go with bond bank rather than special public works fund and having a call period, we could probably come shorter than 10 years, but it would be 8 years typically minimum, and more likely 10, during which you wouldn't be able to refinance your bonds. And I guess the importance of that depends on whether we think with what's the likelihood of recession? How likely do we think it is that rates will be significantly lower than they are right now? And I used to have a stronger point of view than I do. I think we've continued to see jobs added and other things that show strength, even in spite of the Fed doing considerable tightening in interest rates. I used to just say, oh, rates are coming back down as soon as the recession comes, and they will come down some, but I don't know exactly how much. But one feature that I think is really worth paying attention to is that with that IFA loan, it is callable anytime. And this project, had it been financed, let's say 2 years ago, the rates would have been in the 2% range, and that's significantly lower cost. And it's not unreasonable to think that that bonds could be refinanced out of that 396. And I don't think the bond bank rate that you would get, it is likely better than the IFA loan, but it's not a huge difference. And I think we could quantify, what the savings would be for during your construction period. I think it depends on how long your construction period is. I don't know, if it's a 1-year construction period, you'll be drawing most of your debt pretty quickly, and so having a single year of 1% coupled with an unknown of your long-term rate and being locked up for 10 years, it's not as attractive as it might otherwise be. But fundamentally, I also presented here, there's a slight difference. If you were to sell GO bonds, you would get a slightly better rate, but it's not as dramatic as one might think. You're talking about in a true interest cost difference, only 7 basis points, 0.07% better. For however much work and time it takes to go to the voters. In times past, we would have expected that benefit to be significantly greater. We are living in somewhat strange times from my perspective. I've been in public finance for almost 20 years. It'll be 20 years in June, and this is This is a time unlike what I've seen before. I suppose if I had been around in the 80s, it might look more familiar to me. But I was not, at least not in finance. I don't know. I'd like to just kind of open for questions. I would say that I think if the city does want to move forward, right now the offering from the Special Public Works Fund is superior in almost every way to anything I could get for you. I would say the exception would be if there were to be a recession that came on more suddenly and the Fed were to begin lowering rates more aggressively, then we might be in a situation where you could get a bond that would be substantially lower rate. It takes usually the IFA borrowing rate does not reset as frequently. And so that would be the reason to go with a publicly offered bond. But anyway, I'm open for questions. I did have a couple other points, but I don't think they're critical. I can come back to them.
Hey, John, what's the cushion, the interest rate cushion?
We were using 1.5%.
Yeah, what is that for? I'm not sure.
Oh, sure. It's just it's because we have found that it's useful when talking about the costs of a project. Numbers tend to get stuck in people's heads, and if I'm using the right now interest rates, then rates go up. They are people think I've somehow violated their trust, or and it's really about when rates have been volatile. We've seen recently actually situations where we thought we had put sufficient cushion in, maybe we put a 1% cushion in and then rates went up by 1.2%, and it leaves people scrambling. So this is kind of to give a picture. But I would say, fundamentally the actual current market rates are very similar to what Becky was showing.
Okay. Thank you.
You bet.
John, I had a question. Usually you're in a recession before it's declared for a little while.
Yeah.
And so if, let's say 6 months from now, the financial picture changes dramatically, what then is your advice in that situation to address those kind of major changes that we might see?
Oh boy, advice. I don't really want to stray very far from advice in terms of financing.
Okay.
I would say that one of the advantages of proceeding with IFA, and I don't have any skin in that game at all, is the fact that it is callable at any time. That you would be able, if things change dramatically, you could literally shift course, and it takes us, usually 10 to 12 weeks to be ready to sell bonds.
Okay.
But if 6 months down the road, we're like, oh, wait a minute, in the public markets, you could do a lot better. We could position ourselves to do that. It does mean, it could mean that you would spend a lot of work applying with the state, in the interim. But I mean, I wouldn't say that outcome is a certainty by any stretch, but certainly it would be available. I think that's, I put in my own notes that the primary advantage of going with the state right now is that the rate is no worse, and you have that anytime callability.
Okay.
So you gain greater flexibility. They don't give you your proceeds up front for you to invest. You make draws and submit invoices. One, I guess, a minor advantage of selling bonds in the public market is that you can invest your proceeds right now at a higher rate than what you would borrow at, because you're borrowing tax exempt, and you can invest in taxable bonds. There are situations in which you can actually keep the excess earnings. In most cases, if your project is longer than 12 months, you actually have to write a check for the excess earnings back to the IRS, because they don't like you to earn money on your tax exemption that they're kind of resentful about in the first place. But at least you could earn right up to the cost of your borrowing. So in other time periods, it's not very long ago where if you were buying short-term bonds, you were getting 0.37%. And if you borrow, even if you borrowed at 2%, you were always losing a little bit of money on your proceeds. And in those situations, being able to just draw and begin to pay interest as you actually have costs, can be pretty advantageous, but it's not particularly so right now.
Hey, Layla, and John, I thought I heard Becky say that the note was not callable for 10 years. Was
that's if you go with the bond bank. And I hope I didn't jumble that. There's a difference between the Special Public Works Fund and the Oregon Bond Bank.
Correct.
Going in with the bond bank is less of an advantage for you than it is for the state. It basically lets them package and sell those loans they've made, and raise capital to make other loans. It is a common practice. It's not something untoward in any way, but most of the advantage from that accrues to the state.
Okay, great.
So John, I think you're basically saying that you can't really compete with Becky on a loan. Can you draw a contrast between Becky's loan and a GO bond?
Sure. Yeah, well, certainly. I mean, I guess the key is there's not a lot of contrast right now. The rates are about the same. The primary advantages that we would have had over the state in recent times would be that we could get you a better rate. I guess another advantage is I think typically we can proceed a little more quickly for you, but they may have tightened up how quickly they can get you processed. It seems to me, one of the things that came about in the last handful of years, because rates in the public markets were down in the 1s and 2s, especially if they were for shorter terms, a lot of the Special Public Works Fund debt was refinanced out into the public markets. And so I think the state actually has more funds to put to work right now. And that's why they're no longer just looking at, or I guess they're widening the definition of essential purpose to include a city campus where you house administrative services and other things. But Special Public Works typically was for the kinds of things you would consider public works, especially essential water, sewer, electric, in the case of an city-owned utility. But yeah, they've got money to put to work, and they're I think making sure that the rates they offer are competitive. And where we would make a big difference is if you had a larger project. They have a cap at $10 million, and we do financings up to $1 billion. Anyway, and I think again, if you are rolled into the bond bank, I think your advantages dissipate pretty quickly. The primary advantage is that anytime callability. It is helpful that it's coming from state monies. If there were federal funds mixed in, your project costs would expand pretty quickly.
Layla, I have a question. Would Becky's program require voter approval?
No.
So I'm a little confused still about this bond bank thing. Do we have any control as to whether that our loan goes to the bond bank? I mean, Becky made it sound like we did. But is that truly the case? I guess.
You do. The thing that I'm not sure of is how long you can still pull the plug. I should have asked before she left, because I think in order to get that 1.5% to 2% construction period interest rate, you have to be signed up for the bond bank. I don't know how rigid they are in terms of requiring that you stay on board if that's where you are. I can say that you would be, approaching the end of your construction period, and if the bond bank rate were going to be higher than what you would have gotten from IFA, that would mean that the whole market had moved up in rates, and so if you pulled out and went with an IFA rate, your rate would also be higher. And I think if you're talking about it really depends on how long your construction period is. But if you're talking about a 2-year construction period where you're paying, 2% instead of 3.5% or just under 4%, that's 2% for 2 years. And it's not on the whole amount, it's just on the parts that you've drawn. And so you might even say if you had a relatively even spend down, it's the equivalent of having 1 year of that difference in rate. And if you end up financing with a permanent rate that's 50 basis points higher, and then you're stuck in that for 10 years, you're obviously worse off in that scenario. Of course, if
We expect a 12-month or less construction timeframe.
so, the advantage, I think that, they'll do the loans for people who are very early in the process, right? I mean, she said they would finance, the pre-development costs, engineering and design. And so I think if you were spending money and, I think Manzanita's in a really enviable position in that your transient lodging taxes are really strong. You have a solid, very solid general fund balance. And so you're not really in a position where you're, having to think really hard about, can we write a $30,000 check for something? And that would be some of the advantages from working with the state too. But again, that versus a bond in the financial markets, I think a lot of people would rather have their proceeds sooner. So.
Are there any other questions or discussions? Questions for John or Layla? Well, John, thank you for giving us your day. If we have questions for you, we can shoot them to Layla and get answers that way.
Absolutely. Reach out anytime.
Okay. Appreciate you being
Thank
here.
you so much, John.
Appreciate you, Candace.
Appreciate it.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you. Enjoy the day.
You too.
Okay, Layla, we're moving over to, are we ready to move over to the water rate study?
We sure are. Dan's going to actually run the show here. So he should be joining us. Hey there, everybody. All
Hey,
right.
how's it going today? Okay, I
All
need
right.
screen sharing abilities.
Let's see. Nancy, can you give Dan sharing power?
She has done so,
Yes.
and I'm working on it. Oh, one thing they do is they put this darn thing right in the way of your screen.
I don't know, you're getting pretty good at this, Dan.
It seems like to change every time I go to use it. Some update. So we're going to continue on with our discussion about the rate study. So last workshop, we kind of left with a few ideas and some direction from you guys. So simply, we are down to essentially, I think, one considerable question right now. And so that is, back a slide. So is essentially the objective for today, which is to provide guidance to us if short-term rentals should be considered a commercial account. And so what on that is, it's going to set up the stage for essentially the final piece that we'll bring to you guys as a council for some type of decision on. So our current rates, once again, I keep highlighting this. We have about 1,845 residentials, and our current rate is $39.50 is our base rate. And it's so in the outside of the city limits, they pay a little bit more because they are outside the city limits. And they pay $49.25. We allot them 4,000 gallons of water per month. So even though you guys get your bills quarterly, all our numbers are figured on a monthly basis. So after that, it's $2.50 per thousand after the 4,000. So, and one of the critical things I'm going to keep touching on is that 4,000 gallons that we're allotting. Essentially, it's not that we can't produce that amount of water. Is the fact if we had to produce that amount of water, the water budget would be going into a hole really fast. So we're giving away way too much water essentially. So we did some number crunching after the last one to come up with some figures for you guys. So residential customers are using roughly about 4,000 gallons or 4 units. And hang on one second. I think I've got the wrong slideshow. Nope, that's the right one. Sorry about that. And that's going to make me jump through the hoops. Okay, so water customers. So right now, summer average is 4 units, and you'll hear us talk about units. So units is 1,000 gallons of water. So if you want to get really down to the number, we're about 3.9 units per month in the summer month. And then in the winter, we're about 1.6 units for residential. So essentially the general homeowner is only using 1,600 gallons of water a month. So
And can I clarify, just
yeah,
sorry to interrupt. Do you know those? So this question is because I don't want to increase the rates for full-time residents. So 1 to 2 people living in their home. With those summer rates jumping above 2, are those numbers, do you think, coming from our larger or from our short-term rentals, some of our larger capacity ones?
so essentially with the residentials, so in the wintertime, residentials, only about 77% of them are using 2 units.
Okay. So
In-
that's
in the-
like a normal resident, a normal full-time resident.
Yep, a
uses-
normal full-time resident, and that's not STRs I'm counting, just residentials. So in the summer months, about 52% are using between 0 and 2 units. And in the wintertime, about 77% of our system is using only 2 units. So, which now I will clarify, that is people that live here full time, and that is second homeowners. I don't have a way in our water system to distinguish the two.
Yeah.
But I did pull out the short-term rental because we are able to track those. So does that kind of answer the question?
Yes. Thank
Okay.
you.
And as we go along, you'll see what I have in here. I have what it's broken out to what a homeowner would be paying.
Thank you.
So STRs as a commercial, why we're considering looking at making them commercial. So if we do, their proposed rate would be $57.07 a month. They won't have a base, so they don't get 2,000 gallons of water for free or built into the price. What they are going to be doing is paying per thousand after the $57.07, just like any commercial account would be doing. So to kind of break it down, the average for them, and if we do this, STRs as a commercial, you'll notice it says $9.50 per 1,000 gallons. So kind of keep that number in your mind for a little bit. So the summertime average, they use about 18 units of water. So quite a bit more than residentials.
A lot more.
And so they would be looking at 18 units. They would be paying roughly $228.07 a month for water. That's their summer usage. Versus if they're treated as normal, their water bill would be $199.56 for that amount of water usage. And that's a lot of water usage. So wintertime for short-term rentals you'd be looking at an average of about $123.57 if we make them commercial. If they're not commercial, their water bill would be about $104.56. These numbers don't seem very different when you think about it or look at these numbers as the average. But here's where it gets a little more interesting. So I broke them down a little bit more. And so 0 to 2 units in the summertime of the STRs we have, which is, I believe it's 240 of them, roughly. In the summertime, 10% of them are using the 0 to 2,000 gallons a month. And then in the winter, you can see 65% of the STRs are in that range. But then as we keep moving along and the numbers going up, you see 2 to 7 units there's about pretty much 80% of the STRs are falling in that range. And then 7 to 15, we have about 8%. And then above 15, which we do have a couple that use pretty significant amount of water, we have 2% of the STRs and 1% in the winter. So there are some few units out there that are using a lot of water. So does that data kind of help out with where kind of seeing what's being used with the STRs?
Very helpful, Dan. Thank you.
Okay.
Dan,
Yeah.
is there any way to parcel out or separate the smaller units from the really large units in terms of STRs? Would that be so complicated it wouldn't be?
Now, when you say that, are you talking about the size of the STR or their water usage?
Well, I was thinking the size. I'm assuming size and water usage go hand in hand.
They pretty much they do, and I think you're going to see that the ones that are on here have, like, I believe there's one that has like an STR that has its own pool and stuff. What I can't do is supply you guys like addresses and their water usage. So I have to keep it kind of generalized so we don't start getting into confidentiality stuff.
Well, I guess my question is there a way to draw a line and say we keep the smaller short-term rental at a residential one, the larger at a commercial, so to kind of differentiate between the two? Is that more challenging?
I would say you could do that, Linda, but then I'm kind of the mindset that we should be treating all of them the same.
Okay.
Here's a good example. An STR, if you look at the short-term rental tax, we charge a short-term rental tax to individual homes. We also charge it to motels. So a motel is paying a commercial rate and a short-term rental fee. So same with these, a bigger house, I personally wouldn't want to get into the thing where we have to draw a line in the sand and say, if you're over X amount of square feet.
Okay.
So that could get pretty complicated, and I think could get a little bit messy.
Okay, and just one last question. There's one that really stands out in the 2 to 7. The summer at 79%.
Yeah.
Why is it that different? I mean, that's a pretty big difference from the 0 to 2, or even 7 to 15.
So essentially, that's the biggest area of most of the water usage is happening with short-term rentals in the summer. They're using between 2 units, so between 2 and 7,000 gallons a month.
Okay.
So, which is a good window.
Yeah.
And like I said, when we look at that previous slide, why they're going to be falling more in the summer usage of 228 a month.
Okay.
So essentially, it's, when you kind of look at it, they're going to pay $30 more a month for the average short-term rental. It's these numbers, the 7 to 15 and 15% above, they're paying a more premium number for water because they're using a lot more water. And so one of the things that OAW is still working on, it's in my notes on the end, is they are still working on the tiered structure side of it to see what we're looking at. The numbers we are working on are literally the numbers that need to be made just for the budgeting purposes of being able to pay for the water budget.
Wow.
Thank you, Dan.
It's a great breakdown.
I missed that. What was that?
I said it's a great breakdown. I mean, it's really, really pertinent information.
When we can get data out of our water software, it works great. But sometimes it's like pulling teeth. Brad knows how that goes.
Hey, Dan, can you go back to that last slide for a second?
Yeah.
So I'm looking at this winter average 7 units B, whatever, versus treated as normal water. What would a resident pay as far as?
So if a resident at $950, and this is once again at $950 a unit, if they used a regular residential, they would be paying the $104.56.
So if we said, hey, you get 2 units and then you're paying on top of that, most of us are going to pay a little bit of a premium in the summer, it sounds like. But in the winter, we'd be paying basically the same as a STR.
There's a lot of the STRs, yeah. That's why I think it really reflects in that range of 2 to 7. So, and why, like, we go back over here, 0 to 2. So 10% of the short-term rentals and 65 of them are using just the 0 to 2 ratio. So if they were residential, considered residential, not a commercial, then they would just fall under the regular base fee. Does that make sense?
Mhm.
Yeah, so there's not a scenario where an STR would be paying less than a resident.
No.
Okay.
This might be opposite of everyone else, but I'm not comfortable with classifying STRs as commercial at this point. What I, in my head, see is we have our base rate. You get 2 units for that. And then a tiered structure for everyone, including STRs, where your next 2, or whatever your tiers are, your next 2 are $9, your next 2 after that are $10, your next 2 after that are $12. So it's kind of like an increment tier. So the STRs are still paying for their fair share of water, but it's the big ones that are paying an additional premium if they're using 18,000 gallons of water a month, that they're going to pay a curved rate on that. I also worry about the short-term rentals who don't do the high volume, that also use it as a second home, make some money. They'll still pay their tiered rate, but I don't know. We've just hit our short-term rentals hard this year, and I think for good reason. They need to pay for what they're using, but that would just be my proposal.
Yeah, and I really like that. That's kind of what I was trying to get to. I think that makes a lot of sense in part.
And then I think it encourages, what's the word I'm trying, like thoughtfulness with using your water.
Conservation.
Conserving your water.
Conservation, right.
Yes,
Right.
thank you.
I think that's great.
Okay. So now, with that being said, let's jump to the next piece of information. Remember the $9.50 I told you to remember. So the effect, if they're treated as commercial versus not. If we do not treat them as commercial, then overall the usage fee for the city won't be $9.50 per thousand. It will be $11.40. So a little bit of an increase there, but it affects the city overall. So here we're going to have some notations.
Dan, can you go back to that last slide? I don't understand it. I'm sorry.
So that slide says, Brad, essentially, if STRs are treated as commercial, then the city overall, the 1 unit that we use, so like when you go past 2 units, you're going to pay for a 3rd unit. So you're going to pay for 1 extra unit. 1 extra unit will cost you now $11.40 if the STRs are not considered a commercial.
Oh, I see. Okay.
Is there any way for that number, to make things more complicated, to make that number increase? So it's $9.50 for your first unit, it's $10 for your second unit, $10.50 for your third unit, like.
So it would start off essentially at $11.40 is literally, according to OAW Tim Tice, that is the base unit that we have to have
Okay.
in order to make our budget.
Okay.
So now we can go on top of that, we can set up the tiers, and that's one of the things he is looking at now is more of the tiered structure. But he has to have a decision here to kind of know how he adjusts. Because we're not going out to make a big profit. We're literally looking at trying to meet our budget needs. So $11.40, once again, is without them being considered STRs not being considered commercial. 950 is what it would be if they are. So, water rates for the general water user. The base rate is broken down. It's 47.56 is what our new monthly basis will be inside the city. It will be 57.07 if you're outside the city limits. So for that 47.56 and that 57, you'll get 2,000 gallons of water in your base fee, it's built into the base fee.
And that's up from $39.50.
That is correct.
Okay.
So now, after 2 units, once again, you have to kind of look at it in 2 ways. So I've ran some numbers here. So if STRs were considered commercial again, typical summer rate for a homeowner inside the city limits would be $66.56. And outside, or in the wintertime, it'd be $47.56. So that would be essentially the average user in Manzanita. If you're outside the city limits, you're looking at $76.07 as your summertime typical, and $57.56 would be your wintertime usage. And once again, that's an average of all the water usage things. If we don't treat the STRs, once again, then what you're looking at is your typical base fee still is $66.56 for the residential. And then the last number is what changes, because now we're looking at essentially the units to get us from 2 to 4 units. So you're paying for 2 additional units on average. So that would be your monthly bill now would be $79.87.
Are those 2 numbers flipped, do you think?
Yeah. What's that?
I think those 2 numbers are flipped. That your summer should be the 79 and your winter will be the 66.
You have winter twice in the
Oh, I did. I thought I corrected that one. I missed that one.
Okay.
Layla even highlighted it for me.
Yeah, and the one below, Dan, is less outside city limits. That seems also a little weird.
Yeah, how did I knew I fixed that once. So it's easy to figure out. So here's how we do our water bill math. So essentially, our base rate for inside and outside the city is the $47.56. So, and then we're adding 2 units. So we're going to add 11. What did I say? It was 11.
1140.
40.
40,
So
yep.
70-36.
Yep, 70.36.
Okay.
So that's what the inside one will be with the essentially the units. Does that kind of make sense?
So if we don't do STRs in the winter, it would be 47.56. If we do STRs, or if we don't do STRs, it would be 70 something. Is that what?
That is correct. 70.36.
$4 more.
Yeah.
And I have another complication question, but I'm just kind of curious. Is it possible to give the STRs a little bit of a breather and say that they will go to commercial rates a year from now, for example, and give them a chance to adjust to the increases that they've been awarded this year? Is that an option?
Or maybe we could reassess in a year.
Or will we be reassessing every year? Are these going to be up for on a yearly review?
No, we'll do essentially water rates would be increased annually based upon an index, engineering index. And then my suggestion is actually doing a full rate study every 3 years. So why every 3 years? Because that essentially catches up with anything that's, 1, change in the market, and 2, where we are in our CIP projects, because part of the water operation funds does fund water projects that are in the CIP. Does that kind of answer that? And as far as offsetting it a year, that would be a policy question more, and a budgetary thing. And that's something I'd have to talk with OAWU and Layla about as far as figuring out how that would work in the budget.
Thank you.
So once again, Manzanita, the average for the residential is they use 4 units in the summertime, and in the wintertime, the average is for residentials is 2 units that are built into the base. So, and then commercial accounts, they're going to pay the 5707. They don't get a base rate or a base amount in there built in. So everything they use from 0 on up, they're being charged the rate for. And once again, if we go with the concept of no STR for or don't treat STR as commercial, it'll be $9.50 a thousand. And if we decide to make the STRs commercial, then it would bump it to $11.40. So,
Dan, is that difference between $9.50 and $11.40? Is that strictly because
the funds that we make from the STRs?
They get a budget, but to make your budget work, is that what that's about?
Yeah, this is all based on the budget. Literally, it's no extra money. It's essentially to pay for the projects, the water projects that we talked about last week in 1 and 2, and creating more of a policy reserve. I hope I said that right. So, but yeah, that's what it is. And so our budget should be increasing essentially roughly the same as the inflation rate. As labor costs go up, they affect the budget. And that's why we use the incremental annual increases to cover that. And why in 3 years we can see, are we too much or are we too little? And so one of the interesting things is this last special note I wanted to cover because it kind of covers what you're asking about, Brad. So back in 2014, when we did the water rate study, it marked the price at $39.50. So I have this beautiful Excel spreadsheet I put together that essentially shows our growth since then and actually shows the base rate increasing each year at 2.21%, which was recommended at the time of the rate study. If those increases happen to be happening, our base rate right now would be at $46.75 a month versus what we're proposing right now, which is $47.56. So they weren't off very far back then of what we should be today, which is pretty darn good. But unfortunately, because we didn't do any increases, we right now, if we were at the $46.75, and this is just the base rate, if we were at the $46.75, we would be intaking about $155 plus or minus $1,000 a year on just the base fees coming in. And since it's been since 2014 to now, we essentially have missed out almost $1 million worth of funding that would have gone in to be able to pay for maintenance items and project stuff. And that's why Layla is very adamant that as part of this, we make sure we are doing those annual increases like we should be doing. Mm-hmm. And why at 3 years, we want to reevaluate. So we want to, once again, look at those CIP projects where we are. Is there new projects that have come up? And make sure they're put into the budget and adjust for it at that point. So one other note I wanted to touch on is because you guys keep hearing me talk about monthly meter reading. So right out of the gate, I can tell you one thing is we in the water department will go to a monthly essentially system, but that won't mean that we're going to a billing system that's once a month because that adds a huge workload to the administrative side. One, we're not ready to jump through hoops yet on there. So for us, the monthly reads are literally to help us at Public Works determine leaks and things like that. And that was one of the things OAWU said, hey, you got to catch those things. So because we do write quite a few leak credits, and leak credits cost us money. So, and then Tim, like I said, once he gets kind of some feedback on how you guys feel about the short-term rental thing, guidance, then he will work on more of the tiered number approach and see how the tiers work out. So is there any questions I can answer?
So do we have to make a decision on short-term rentals before we look at tiers, or is it black and white short-term rentals are either we either increase or leave them the same, and we'll do the tiers. I mean, where can we wait it until we know what the tiers are between the two?
It creates a lot more work for Tim to try to run all those numbers.
Okay.
And so,
but Dan, the tier approach is really designed to get at the overusers.
that is correct. And it is being used for water conservation.
Right. And I think the angst that we're having on STRs is we really don't understand the pool of users that are out there. We have 250 plus STRs, but they vary significantly in terms. I'm not even worried about square footage. I'm thinking more about occupancy. You know, if somebody rents 300 nights a year and somebody else rents 12 nights a year, they're fundamentally different operations, and to treat them all the same that's what I think folks are struggling with. Whereas with the tiered approach, they'll treat themselves differently because they'll use different amounts of water and therefore pay different rates, different amounts, I should say, based on choices they're making, and they presumably have the clientele to pass those costs on to. So I think I'm not sure yet myself personally where I would come down on treating everybody as commercial, but I think what we're really ultimately trying to get to is to make sure the biggest users pay the biggest ticket. I mean, within commercial rates, just forget about SCRs going up and down Lanita. I assume that a commercial user that has a kitchen and a bunch of bathrooms uses a lot more water than a retail shop that probably doesn't have. So we treat all commercial entities with that one sort of regressive approach, I guess. But the tiers really gets at separating the users from the non-users.
And I've got some more breakdown. I mean, I didn't include it in the slide because I was, like I said, trying to keep it kind of simple as far as just the discussion. But to kind of go with that, so of our commercial area, in the summertime, about 27% of the commercial area uses the 15 plus units. But you're looking at, once again, you're talking about motels, restaurants. So, and I've looked, Jerry, at several different tier approaches just out of curiosity what other cities are using, and it's quite a spectrum.
Yeah.
And so that's one of the reasons too that Tim has to really dissect essentially those numbers and see how it's going to affect both businesses and residential.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think in general, this doesn't solve the problem right now today, but I think in general, as we move forward, we really need to better understand the variations among the SCRs that are out there. It's if you look citywide, apparently based on how much tax revenue it produces, it's a $10 million a year industry, probably more than that in terms of gross receipts. And that's a big industry in a little town like this. And because it has 250 plus individual operators, it's really hard to understand and appreciate the dynamics of that industry as much as I think we'd like to right now today, wrestling with this question. And that's not on anybody in particular. It just means that we've got work to do, I think, understanding what those different operators look like. I mean, we hear a lot from operators who suggest that they are very, very small, modest mom and pop operations. Maybe they're out there. I don't know what number of STRs would fall into that category. I'm not really sure how they're self-defining themselves in that way. But that's a challenge, I think, for policymakers to be making policy, in this case, water rate policy, without having as firm a handle on the underlying facts as we probably should.
Well, I think if I understood it correctly, there's really not an enormous difference in costs for the average user if you decide not to charge STRs the commercial rate. They'll pay $10 more a month, and then if you did, and then the base rate or the additional rate goes down $2. So I think, in a way, it's really a policy decision. It seems like there's enough information here for you to decide between whether you want to just charge in the residential rate, because with the tiered rates, those big users are going to be paying a lot more, irregardless if they're paying the commercial rate or not. So, and it makes about a $4 difference, it looks like, for the average user on a monthly basis. And please correct me if I'm wrong on that, Dan, but
That is
that's what
correct.
it says.
The average user, there's not
The
much.
majority of users in the winter use what's included in their base rate, and so they're not paying anymore. And so if you charge the STRs that same base rate, they are going to pay more, the ones that are the big users.
That feels a lot better to me.
It's really entirely your call, but I feel like that, just so we understand that, there's not an enormous difference between the two. And then if we do know, then staff can actually come back with a set of tiered rates that you can then look at and review and determine if that means something to you. But it sounds like to me, the average user, if you choose not to charge the STRs, the commercial rate, is only going to pay about $4 more. Did I get that right, Dan?
Yeah, that's why I ran the STR numbers a couple times. I even ran them again in front of Tim, and it was the average. It just on STRs where that big money's made up is those big STR customers. So on average, it's $4 difference. So
if we were to decide not to treat STRs as commercial, would that influence how Tim approaches the tiers? Would it make him more aggressive?
It allows him to, he can make him more aggressive. But I think what he needs is he's got to know essentially which direction we're going, because I think that tiered number is, based off the 1150 for the tiers, or it's based off the 950. So,
right.
Layla, do the STRs get charged a commercial rate for any other utilities?
No.
Well, I'll, in terms of next step, I'm really uncomfortable in charging STRs the commercial rate. And it, a lot of it has to do with the fact that we just raised their fees significantly. If it's just a $4 difference between residential and STR, if there's a $4 increase, I'm really comfortable with that.
yeah.
I mean, that's just me.
Yeah. And once again, it's just so we can essentially move forward on it. And so.
And it will be something that we could review next year. Is that correct? Did I hear you say you're going to do a full rate study every 3 years, but there's going to be an increase annually? If we find that maybe this wasn't the best decision, we could come back and look at it a year from now. Is that correct?
Yeah. So when we go to do the budget for next year, we'll be looking at what we've essentially made for our resources and how that compares to our budget. If there's like a huge shortfall, then we'll have to look back and look at redoing a full rate study. But once again, I think if we go with the 11, which is considered for the short-term rental, then once again we'll be able to see the numbers when they come in and how it reacts. So, I guess the best way to say it works both ways, and we can review that part of it again in another year or another 3 years. So.
I was curious, Dan, the largest commercial users, who are the top 1, 2, or 3 water users commercially?
Like which buildings?
Yeah, like, is it the hotels or is it the restaurants?
You're looking at essentially the hotels and restaurant.
Okay.
And they're on a much bigger meter. So when I'm talking about the rates for commercial, that is based on a 5/8 size meter. Most of your commercial meters are 2-inch, 1.5 inch. And so like a 2-inch base rate on a meter is going to be $165.49. That's their base. And why is it higher than residential? It's because a 2-inch can flow much more water than a typical residential meter can. So we break it down. I don't want to get too far in the weeds, but what we call EDUs, equivalent dwelling units, and that's what we use for a multiplier.
You are a wealth of information.
I've got a lot of papers on my desk. We've been doing lots and lots of work and studies, so
I'm sure you have. It shows, and we appreciate that work because it's a big decision and it's a lot to break down. But the more information we have, the better we can do going forward. It must pain you to know that we've lost $1 million in the last.
It does, and I'm grateful, that Layla is like, hey, we need to fix these things, and she's been a great help on going through and helping out getting this stuff going. So I only can do so much with what I have, and when folks are wanting, replace lines and do things, well, money's got to come from somewhere. So we says we got to do it. So,
well, appreciate your transparency and all of that. Also,
yeah.
Is there?
Well, my feeling is that we can't really go wrong either way. I think it's really important to note that we're dealing with this. It seems like a lot of what we deal with is what hasn't been updated, and in years and years. And I myself would hope that whoever fills my seat in the future isn't having to make these same decisions that should have been made years ago, and putting us in these more awkward situations. I'm very in favor of the annual increase in the master fee list that we discussed at the budget meeting, and so that's kind of my 2 cents. I hope that people that get elected in the future get to work on some fun things instead of always working on catching up. So yeah, that's my 2 cents.
Dan, do you have what you need from us?
I think so. I think my feeling from you guys is that let's keep SCR.
Can I just clarify that? Sorry, Dan. Do you have what you need? I think we were asking, should we charge STRs a commercial rate or not? I'd love to just get around Robin Council so that staff have very clear direction. Sorry, I'm not clear, so I just want to make sure I'm clear.
Well, I think that's an appropriate question. That's
Linda, you mentioned that you were in favor of keeping them residential. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay, and Brad?
I'm fine with that. I hope that we will keep our promise and look at it in a year to see where we are.
That would be my opinion as well. Jerry, how about you?
Yeah, I agree. I'm not as enthusiastic as Linda and Jenna, but I agree to go this route as long as we do a good review this time next year, I guess. I was going to ask you, Dan, given how long it's been since we've done what you're now doing, how do you feel about us having to put you through a similar process a year?
3 years?
No, next year. I think next year we got to. This is going to be a big change. I mean, I know myself. I've paid $118.50 every 3 months since I moved here. I don't mind paying more, but I think when we start seeing new numbers, we're going to hear about it. And so I think we really need to anticipate that and take a hard look a year from now to see if the adjustments have accomplished what we're trying to do. We're really trying to just, in addition to covering ourselves and keeping up with inflation, we're really trying to charge the big users. for big use. And if we accomplish that without calling STRs commercial, that'll be great. But we just have to see that next year. And I guess I'm just asking you to be ready for another round of this.
Oh no, that's fine, Jerry. I'd like I said, it's a lot of numbers, a lot of paperwork, but it's keeping it fair and equitable. And that's the main thing, is keeping our system, for me, is keeping our system health moving forward, not going downhill. And we're at that break point. And we have not put in a lot of water main replacement projects and stuff. We've just been doing kind of road projects. And that's why part of that budget and paying for that is to be able to do that. And so if we get a ton of extra money in the water, the water system, we might be able to scale it back or hold there, as far as inflation goes. So I think in a year, we'll have actual good numbers to see how our budget's doing and how our workload is doing, and balance those two out. So
That makes sense.
Okay.
I think it's also, I would like to, just to be clear, I would like short-term rentals to stay residential. I think it's also a good question to pose to the short-term rental committee to put some thought into it in the next several months about short-term rentals being commercial, and if there should be a designation there, because that's a big question, a big topic, and maybe they can take a stab at it first.
Yeah, I'll talk to Joe about that. I think that's a good idea. The one last thing I want to say, or I'd like to request of staff, Layla and Dan, to think about. I know we haven't made the final decision yet, and we're going to be talking about I'm assuming in the upcoming city council meeting, so we can make a decision. We'll be talking about the amount we're going to charge and the change that's going to occur. And I would like to have some pre-thought into how we communicate that to the community. I think part of the issue, I think Brad spoke pretty eloquently about part of the issue. I think the other issue is that in order to do the construction and the infrastructure of work that we need to do and that you've identified as important, I think it's really important to get the information out to the community as quickly and as clearly as possible. This is going to be a big change, and I just think we need to get ahead of it as much as we can. So
yeah.
If you can be thinking about that as we get there, I'd really appreciate that and would encourage you to do that.
Yeah, no, I can speak because I know our neighboring cities and districts around us have also done rate increases. And I will admit a couple of them were way more drastic than what we are looking at. And it came off to the public because there wasn't much notice other than a little thing that said, oh, by the way, rates are going to change.
Right.
And yeah, so even where I live, my water rates went up almost $40 a month increase.
Well, and maybe discuss comparison water rates. Whatever you guys decide to do. But one of our goals, and I think if we start a little bit early, it's not bad, is better communication with the community. And I think this is a perfect example where we can get ahead if we are clear and reach out early.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Might be a good topic for the next Man's Need a Minute, which goes into the water.
I was just thinking.
So we'll work on that. I think probably the next appropriate step, though, is and you guys correct me if I'm wrong, I don't know if you're ready for a decision because we still need to go through the tiers. So my recommendation would be that we have another discussion, and Dan, I think Tim can probably be ready for us at the next work session on June.
That's good.
June 14th.
Yep.
That gives us time to prep for it. I think if I recall, Lori told me my deadline for the water bill is June 21st or something. So we would at least be able to preliminarily let people know before there's a decision. And I would anticipate that decision would happen if you're ready in July. If you're not, it will happen in August. So that gives us time to give people sort of a heads up before the rate goes up and they see it on their water bill. So I'll put that in as I'll work with Dan on some narrative around describing why and how we're here. And I tried to talk to Tim about the rates. Nehalem, he mentioned, went up a lot. And he's like, they're apples and oranges. And so it was very, got a lot of education out of that comparison. But it is lower than what we're seeing in neighboring communities, which again, I think is a testament to the good work Dan's done managing the system for as long as he has with what he has. But this will start to level us up to where we need to be to maintain and do some of those replacements that we've been holding off on just because we haven't had the maintenance funds to do so.
But that
And I
would
would
put,
encourage council members to also look around at some of the neighboring water rates. So, and kind of get a feel too on how much they're charging and such.
this would, but the water rates would go into effect in August.
That depends when you decide. And I think council really gets to make the call right down on when you want that. So you'll adopt a resolution, and the resolution becomes effective essentially immediately.
Mhm.
Right, but if
Tell
we
us.
if we discuss tiers at the next work session, that's after our next council meeting. So could we do a special meeting that adopts it, or would we wait till July to adopt it?
I think you'd wait till July, and that again just gives us time to
Yeah.
let folks know. I think staff are anticipating July,
Mhm.
and that's July 5th, so it's not too far after the 1st.
Yeah.
Oh, and then rates would go into effect in July, or would you start on the first?
They could go into effect July 6th, but council can tell
Okay.
us we want to go to effect August 1st. And
Oh.
then, what I would like to get out of the work session in June, if you're comfortable and you're ready to accept the tiers, you have no more questions, we're ready to go, to direct staff the date you want them to go into effect. And then I'll draft a resolution for you to adopt in July that states that.
Got
So
it.
we'll
Thank
defer
you.
100% to the city council on that
That's
decision.
perfect. Thanks, Layla.
All I would add to that is what she said.
Any other discussion or questions for Dan? Dan, thank you for your time, as always. We
Great.
More than happy to.
appreciate your piece as an educator here. Very, very well done.
Thank you. But yeah, if anybody has any questions, feel free to reach out. So
Okay.
Okay.
Thank you.
Yep.
And I don't see anything else on the agenda. I did want to take a minute and Layla, I was going to ask you if doing the budget the second year was easier than doing it the first year.
Yeah, in some respects it was. But it was definitely the model, like I said, is a little painful. But yeah, I felt was a lot more efficient this year. But it definitely was a slog.
Kudos to you, and particularly also for getting out the packet so that we could have that information for today's meeting. I am making the assumption that you didn't sleep last night. I think
It's
you
been
get
a
up
few weeks, to be honest.
It's been a week, hasn't it? I also, we have a radio call out next Tuesday that neither Layla or I can do. Is any counselor willing to step up and take that one on? It's really a matter of talking about events or dates. Takes about 2 minutes of your time. Someone want to step up for that, or?
I'll do that.
Okay. All right, Linda, I'll get the information to you. And I always run things past Layla first. So,
I've done this several times before.
oh, good. Okay. That'll make it easy. Is there anything else for the good of the order? Brad, you're just scratching. Your hand's not up, right?
Sorry,
Okay.
looking outside.
Okay. Yeah, I know. Me too. All right. Well, I will adjourn this meeting then at 3:49, and thank you all for your time.
Thank you.
Thank you.